Three phones enter, one phone leaves. We're taking the newest or current cameras of each phone ecosystem to see which company produces the best photos and videos. I'm Juan Carlos Bagnell for Pocketnow, and it's time for a good old-fashioned grudge match. An Android, an iPhone, and a Lumia walk into a bar, and I don't have a good ending for that joke. While we're prepping to tackle the LG G5, we thought it would be fun to take a look at the current state of smartphone cameras. The Galaxy S7 is the new kid on the block, the iPhone 6s is Apple's current flagship, and the SE will likely perform similarly, and we're rounding out this test with the megapixel monster Lumia 950. And before we get a ton of comments complaining about how we should have picked different phones or waited for new phones to come out, we gotta start somewhere. We will get to LG G5 comparisons, Nexus comparisons, Note 6 and iPhone 7 comparisons when those phones are actually released. Now, first a little housekeeping. This trio represents the smaller sized flagship from each respective company. All three shoot native 4:3 aspect ratio frames. The iPhone and Galaxy both have 12 megapixel sensors, while the Lumia saves a 19 megapixel image. The Lumia sensor is the largest at 1/2.4 inches, with the Galaxy a close second at 1/2.5, and the iPhone a much smaller third place with a 1/3 inch sensor. To keep things fair, we're sticking with stock camera apps and the JPEGs delivered directly from each phone, so we'll see what each manufacturer has chosen to focus on for producing pleasing images. Starting with outdoor brightly lit shots, we instantly run into a small issue with the Lumia 950. There's a lot of image processing happening here, and Microsoft is warming up the color quite a bit more than what the scene really calls for. Apple is warming the scene up a little too, but it's closer to reality. Samsung actually lands the happiest balance between eye-pleasing saturation, white balance hue, and an accurate depiction of the scene. Another bright light test using UHD video and with a red subject in the landscape shows similar results. From Lumia to Apple to Samsung, we go from warmest color tone to the most accurate. Moving to a shaded shot, the Lumia 950 surprisingly swings the coldest. Apple remains in the middle, and Samsung stays the warmest. Reality is somewhere in between the iPhone and the Galaxy S7, both landing on either side of the balance between warm California sun and cool shade. We like to keep the lighting in our homes comfortable, and this is an area where the Galaxy S7 ekes out a victory, producing the brightest image. The Lumia follows in second with a dimmer image, but a little less smudging from noise reduction. And the iPhone trails with the darkest shot and the smudgiest noise reduction, especially when pixel peeping. But night shots are where the Galaxy S7 absolutely excels. We see noticeably brighter images over the iPhone 6s, and they tend to be less noisy than images from the Lumia. Though it produces the dimmest images at night, the iPhone showed the least amount of distortion or chromatic aberration. Look at the uniform brightness of the street lamp. The Lumia came second, though you can see some flaring and some color fringing, issues with chromatic aberration. Samsung's lens on our review unit distorted the most, and the wide aperture contributes to even more aberration. Looking at a zoom crop test, the Lumia 950 scores a win, but not by as much as the numbers might lead you to believe. Matching the view on the Galaxy, there's more sharpening going on, but it's not losing by as significant a margin in pixel level detail as we would have expected. The iPhone is a little more honest in its reproduction and doesn't rely on as much sharpening, but it still performs fairly well here too, falling only slightly behind the Samsung. For video zoom, shooting UHD clips, Samsung and Apple will both push well beyond the resolution of their respective sensors. Microsoft, on the other hand, prevents you from zooming into image degradation territory, but that doesn't leave you much room to get closer to your subject. At night, the Lumia's resolution advantages are minimized further still as we have to incorporate more noise reduction. All three cameras see significant image degradation, and the iPhone is the poorest performer of the pack. Moving to ultra-low light situations, both the Lumia and Samsung are able to lock focus here in almost no light, where we're unable to tell if the iPhone ever does properly lock onto the subject as it's continuously hunting through this test. Of course, for a situation like that, we should be using a flash, and all three phones perform pretty well. Surprisingly, the Galaxy with only one LED doesn't seem to be trailing that much behind the iPhone or Lumia using 2 and 3 LEDs respectively. The iPhone had the most difficulty focusing, but ended up with a brighter image than the Galaxy. The Lumia again exaggerates color, but if shooting with rich capture on, you are able to manipulate how much of the flash to use. This is the only time you can reliably deliver multiple exposures, but we'll talk about that more in the HDR section. For color reproduction, the iPhone finds the happiest balance between lighting and subject. This gate is lit by a really ugly orangish yellow security light. Samsung is veering a bit more gold than what this scene really looks like, and Microsoft absolutely nails the white of the gate but almost entirely ignores the lighting information. Just for reference, this scene looks more like this in real life. It was an uncharacteristically windy day in LA while shooting, so we couldn't deliver great audio samples, but on the whole, the Lumia will offer up better audio in most situations. Samsung follows in second with more aggressive noise reduction, dulling the nuances of a scene, and Apple lands last as it still only produces a mono audio track for video, which is supremely disappointing for a flagship phone. A macro performance takes an interesting turn. Getting up close to a small subject, Apple's smaller sensor and smaller aperture is more forgiving, and produces a longer depth of field, making sure these flowers are in focus. The Lumia follows close behind, the larger sensor producing a shallower depth of field. Lastly, on the Galaxy, with a large sensor and widest aperture, has such a razor-thin plane of focus that these flowers look a bit soft or hazy. In my not-so-humble opinion, the Galaxy produces the most pleasant bokeh, followed by the Lumia, and the iPhone produces the busiest blur. Objects in the background of your photos will be more identifiable and can be more distracting. Looking at focusing performance, Apple is the slowest of the bunch and occasionally missed the ball to focus on the tree or bench behind the ball. Lumia was quicker to move back and forth between these two objects, but the Galaxy S7 absolutely smokes the other two with the fastest focus lock and reacquisition we've ever seen on a phone. Moving to HDR, the iPhone still reigns for the best image processing. Not only does Apple find more info in shadows, we also see them rein in details in highlights. Android HDR is really more of a shadow brightening mode, and highlights are more likely to clip. The Lumia's rich capture mode is only in automatic mode, and almost never triggers a true multiple exposure. In fact, looking at the incredible amount of image processing applied to every photo, we think HDR-style color processing might be applied to every shot, regardless if the rich mode is activated or not. Another fun feature, slow motion video, Apple continues to dominate with the smoothest output and fewest drop frames. Samsung and Microsoft battle to something of a tie here. The image is crisper on the Galaxy S7, but the Lumia's slow motion produces one of the coolest Matrix-style speed ramps we've ever seen, nearly stopping time before sliding back to speed. Lastly, looking at camera apps, the iPhone has the most familiar setup for any phone as it's changed very little over the years. That's good for consistency, but there are some frustrating aspects to controlling things like video resolution, which requires you to leave the camera app and head to the phone settings. Controls like HDR and Flash are slightly more difficult to use, as the option pops out tiny pieces of text on your viewfinder, and while there's a whole separate mode for shooting square photos, there isn't one to crop widescreen, which is just silly in the year 2016. The Windows Phone camera app is terrifically elegant. It can be as simple as a shutter and flash controls, or a quick slide pops out manual controls for users to operate. Happily, additional settings don't require you to leave the camera app, nor do they completely block your viewfinder. It could use a little updating though, as options like white balance are slow to respond and don't offer the flexibility found on newer Android devices. Samsung's app is the busiest of the bunch, but still offers a reasonably simple auto mode and fantastic controls for people who like to dig deep. So let's wrap this up. Between these three, we see an excellent representation of the pros and cons of comparing different imaging solutions. Looking only at the camera and not the rest of the phone attached to that camera, our rankings overall place the iPhone in third place, the Lumia 950 in second, and the Galaxy S7 wins the day. The iPhone offers very consistent color processing, a best-in-class HDR mode, and super smooth slow motion, but represents the worst performing flagship for low-light situations and the slowest focusing performance. The sensor size and optics on board also deliver the least photographic stills, especially when looking at depth of field and bokeh. The Lumia 950 will better satisfy resolution junkies, audiophiles, and has a tack-sharp lens, though this app is aging poorly opposite competitors. Image processing is difficult to control and offers the least accurate representation of most scenes. Plus, we didn't even do a panorama comparison because this phone's camera app just doesn't have that option included. Now, the Galaxy S7 displays the weakest macro performance of the bunch and more aberration in night photos, but otherwise demonstrates a terrific balance between light and resolution in almost all shooting conditions. The Galaxy S7 takes the lead for now, but it soon faces the LG G5. Now, we're sure you have thoughts on this comparison, so drop us some comments below and hopefully we can get into some fun debates. As always, thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe to this channel for more reviews and comparisons, and hit that thumbs up button for a little extra positive reinforcement. For Pocketnow, I'm Juan Carlos Bagnell. You can chat me up on Twitter and Instagram as Some Gadget Guy, and I will catch you all on the next video.